Video games, the entertainment medium that brings the concepts of interactivity and storytelling together in an experience that can last upwards of 20 hours, with the occasional aimless wandering because you forgot where to go next. We've all been there. From the arcades and console wars of yesteryear to the online multiplayer and mobile gaming of today, video games have cemented their place in the entertainment industry as a force to be reckoned with, projecting to be worth $300 billion within the next 5 years. Me personally, while I still keep up with modern gaming, I've found myself going back to a lot of retro games the past few years. Whether it's because of nostalgia or the more straight-into-the-action nature of them, there's something about these older titles that keep players coming back to them years after their original release. It was through this growing interest in the old school that I came upon a convention being held at my college back in 2017 called the 8-Bit Gaming Conference. Amongst all the costumes and various vendors was a small area called the National Computer and Video Game Museum, set up by two brothers, Conn and Daniel McAlevey. They had a massive collection of gaming memorabilia on display, with tons of consoles free for people to try out. Come to find out, this one room was part of a much bigger plan they had, to make a proper museum for video games here in Ireland. To learn a bit more, I sat down with the two brothers to discuss this huge project, as well as our mutual interest in the medium.
When I started playing video games, it just seemed really, really cool, you know. Even to the actual control something on screen was a novelty back then.
There used to be days in primary school where everyone could bring in their computers, and I didn't have one to bring in, but I was always just loved that day when everyone else brought a computer. I was just amazed that these things existed.
It seemed cutting edge, you know, it really did, compared to previous forms of entertainment. I mean, even VHS was only really kind of like becoming standardized, you know.
Everything from very, very simple like wireframe graphics and tapes that you'd have to wait ages to load up for a play game, and it may be an error and then you load again, but it was just amazing to me. So I kind of fell in love with video games at that stage, and then as soon as I could save up some pocket money, I bought a Sega Master System 2 from a friend. So that would actually been around maybe 89, 1990 was when I got my first console, and after that then the Super Nintendo came out. Just loved that, still my favorite console of all time.
As you get older, I just wanted to play them for good games. I didn't just see games that you'd play just because they were games, you know. You started being more concerned about the quality of the games as opposed to, you know, just playing something and controlling something on screen. The novelty wears off.
Throughout the late 90s, things changed a bit. I kind of was an adult then at that stage, and I fell out of gaming regularly at that stage. And I still love my Super Nintendo. You know, sit me down playing, say, Bomberman or Mario Kart. It's just, you know, like a pig in shit, basically.
Of course, you know, sometimes life is so hectic that you just don't get a chance to play games as much as you wanted to, and then you end up with a backlog, you know. I mean, I've got one at the moment.
So do I.
Yeah, it's just like, when will I ever get around to doing it? You buy them because, you know, you want them and you want to play them, but, you know, when you're doing other stuff and you're constantly busy.
And then kind of fell out a little bit modern consoles entirely, until the nostalgia buzz hit me, maybe 10 years ago, something like that. And I got the nostalgia, you know, middle-age kind of crisis, maybe an early middle-age crisis.
Conn and Dan have been collecting gaming memorabilia since the late 80s, but when and where did the museum idea spring from?
Retro gaming is just coming along nowadays, more times brilliantly. As you know yourself, you've been to a few retro gaming events.
Of course,
we
yeah.
love retro gaming events because it's
That's
just...
how I ran into you guys in the
Exactly,
first place.
yeah, exactly.
To be honest with you, myself and Ian were just talking, like playing Mario Kart or whatever, about 5-6 years ago now at this stage, and you know, some of the stuff we're getting or from, you know, collecting or whatever is just so impressive. That belongs in the museum, you know. And I think that's kind of where the idea came.
So I think it was 2017 was the first year at Conn, and we had a blast. We loved it. We came back and did it again a few times with them for different events. Again, that's about just gauging people's interest in the scene, and is there really, you know, interest in the museum. And from what we've seen, there's huge interest, and not just even locally, then just this whole worldwide, you know, renaissance of love, nostalgia, and retro gaming, and beyond that, even everything to do with just nostalgia.
I think what sets us apart actually from all the other museums around the world is that for us, the important thing is playing the original hardware. That's, I think, will be our big attraction. The fact that you'll go, and if you want to play a SNES, for example, you will play a SNES, Sure War GB, on a screen that was designed to be used to the best, highest standards at that time. So it's authentic, it's physical, there's something actually in your hand, you know, it's an experience. That is the experience that you cannot get at home.
We've looked at video game museums set up all around the world, and they're just popping up everywhere. It's becoming a very, very popular thing to do. We're going, okay, well, there's certainly interest in this scene, and, you know, we just love it. We eat, sleep and breathe games and nostalgia, and that's so that we said, okay, that was initially when we had the idea to make a museum. well, let's do this, because it looks like there's you know, a gap in the market, so to speak, for this to happen. And at some stage we had so much stuff, and even arcade machines, like there was an arcade place, Clorhead Amusements, that shut down, and because amusement places were shutting down, kind of like, you know, with the lack of interest. But we just got all their arcade machines in one fell swoop there. It was like a spur of the moment thing. It was like they were selling them cheap, got them, and then I was like, what are we going to do with all these arcade machines? And it's like, well, we could make a museum or an arcade, and that's where we started thinking about what we could do, because as you can see, the house started filling up with televisions and arcade machines and kiosks and all sorts of amazing, you know, weird and unusual stuff. And it was like, well, you know, either I'm going to have a house full of all this stuff and it's not going to be, you know, a proper livable situation because I love collecting so much, or we're going to have to find somewhere else to put them.
As I would come to find out, Ireland has a pretty interesting history with the video games industry, with manufacturing plants spread across the entire country. On top of that, it was once home to the European headquarters for one of the biggest names in the early history of gaming.
That's one of the most amazing things about the video game history in Ireland, is that Atari decided to set up here in '79, I think it was, like almost from the start of the boom of the video game industry. Atari couldn't produce enough consoles in America for the worldwide market, so they chose Ireland to invest in. So they had two manufacturing plants in Tipperary and the European headquarters in Limerick, which also was a manufacturing plant, and they manufactured all the home consoles like the Atari 2600s initially, and also huge arcade machine set up too, sent all over Europe. And we found out from research, and even places as far away as Canada, they were sending our consoles and arcade machines to. So that's kind of amazing to have, you know, Ireland right kind of centralized strategically for whatever reasons right from the start of that explosion.
Unfortunately, disaster struck in 1983 with the infamous North American video game crash, which came as a result of poor quality control in a market that had slowly become oversaturated.
It didn't really affect Europe so much, because over here things like the Commodores and Spectrums were much more popular than Atari just at that stage. So it didn't really affect here, except for Ireland, because Ireland of course is manufacturing all the Atari consoles. So it did affect us, and there was hundreds of job losses, and plants were restructured and shut down. It didn't shut them all down territorially. I think the European headquarters went, but some of the plants stayed open and changed from different ownership, like Namco. But it was a huge blow to Ireland to have that video game crash that affected us here.
The manufacturing here didn't end. There was a lot of stuff, even more recent things that were manufactured in Ireland. When you think about how games have evolved, even the fact that even the CD was developed in Ireland.
Really?
Yeah, like when you think like the CD is such a huge impact on gaming, and that was actually developed in Ireland. So there's so many stories.
But now for the million, or rather $1 billion question. With all this talk of museums, are video games art?
They are now.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are now for sure. Didn't really used to be that way, and it's such a modern industry. You know, the history of them is really complex. So it's really hard to say when the first game was made, because there's all sorts of interesting electronic games that might not have been on display on the screen. So a video game we would define as something you watch on a screen, you know. So even from that, we're talking about the 60s really onwards, more so the 70s onwards. So it's a very, you know, we're not looking at ancient artifacts here. I mean, it's you know, I was born in '76 really, you know, so I was alive from the start of the video game industry boom, you know. So it's not an ancient history, but so much has happened in that short time. You know, it's crazy.
The Last of Us, I've been wanting to play that for years. It's really, really good. I just love it. So it's cinematics. It's you know, it's a game. You're playing it, but you could be watching it. You know, a series. It's just so well written, and you know, it's shot even. I mean, you look at it. I mean, if film is an art form, that's definitely an art form. You know, absolutely.
So, there you have it. Here's hoping within the next few years, Conn and Dan's collection find a brand new home. Video games have evolved so much over their short history that some are basically interactive movies, and they're practically dwarfing every other entertainment medium with how much revenue they take in. Movies in 2018, $41.7 billion. Video games in 2018, $151.2 billion. That's a lot of money I'm probably never gonna see.